just subtracted from today's profit. And there's no money in here!
I think as gamers, a lot of us have those occasional moments that seriously remind us, oh yeah, this hobby will leave me bankrupt. And personally, I had a moment like that a couple weekends ago when I stopped by my favorite game convention, CCAG. Now, I love this convention. I've gone to it every year since 2015. It was the go-to place to expand my old school games collection in my high school days, and I eagerly look forward to it every year and can't wait for it to come around next year. With all that being said, God does it make my wallet enter a coma. Anyone who even has a passing interest in collecting retro video games will tell you that the market, at least the North American one, is fucked up 7 ways from Sunday. Games can skyrocket up in price at a moment's notice, they become more and more difficult to find with time even on sites like eBay, and some sellers just seem to be taking advantage of how many more people want to buy up this shit, so you'll be handing over your life savings just to buy an old crusty copy of a PS1 game.
Excuse me, what?
As someone who's avidly collected games since his early teens, I've had to research and study this shit to the point I could label it as my college degree. And in the wake of the Video Game History Foundation finding around 87% of all retro games have no active official way to purchase them, people now more than ever are going to care about picking up older titles, especially in hardcore circles. So guess there'll scant be a better time to talk about this crap than now. I won't lie, a lot of this video just exists so I can gather all my screaming thoughts of why are you like this at my favorite hobby, but I do also want to give at least a couple tips for anyone else who wants to get into or currently is collecting games, by going over what I personally find to be the 4 main problems that have caused older games to cost as much as a new bed in the current day. Because Lord knows your wallet's going to be going through it no matter what, so might as well at least give it some painkillers before you absolutely mutilate it. The general success and popularity of the console you're collecting for. This is one of the problems people will notice almost immediately when you start game collecting. The less popular and successful a console, the more difficult it is to buy a couple games for it without selling your liver. My immediate example for this conundrum is always the 6th generation of game consoles. 2 of these platforms have a wide variety of quality games that are actually pretty easy to hunt down and can be mostly bought for reasonable prices. The other one? The PS2 and OG Xbox are a breeze to pick up older titles for. The PS2 is famously the best-selling video game console of all time, so with such a colossal install base, not only is the system itself much easier to get a hold of, but way more people were buying games for it, meaning a greater amount of copies are still out on the secondhand market. Go to any used video game store or vendor at a convention, and unless they specialize in a certain platform, the PS2 will almost always be the system they have the most games for. I've gotten several of some of the highest profile games for the platform at anywhere from $20 to even under $10. The amount of bang for your buck you can get with this system is staggering. Conversely, that same price range can also be applied to the OG Xbox, just for a different reason. The Xbox didn't hit anywhere near the same numbers the PS2 did, but while the console is still one that's generally fondly remembered, it's also not one where you'll find a lot of hyper-avid fans for this platform specifically. The Xbox is seen more as an interesting footnote in gaming history rather than this god-tier system that fans of it will swear by, much like its 2 generational brothers. So in line with that, you can get a lot of notable games for the Xbox at decent prices, as they aren't the most highly sought after. These 2 are probably some of the most enjoyable systems to collect for as a result of lighter expenses and ease of finding the games. And then there's this purple monstrosity, which might as well be this purple monstrosity, because you better believe every time I see those prices, I fucking grimace! If you are even remotely aware of the collection scene in the current day, especially surrounding Nintendo, you know that collecting for the GameCube absolutely fucking sucks. These games are much harder to find than its generational counterparts, and even if you do find one you want, prepare to fast for the week. This is thanks to the horrendous collector combination of interest in a console being incredibly high, but public supply being incredibly low. The GameCube is in a massive nostalgia phase right now, with many people who grew up with it voicing a love for it online, whether it be in YouTube videos or its simple Twitter posts. So naturally, not only do they want to hunt down some games to relive those memories, but many others will get the idea to do the same, or get younger gamers curious and want to see what all the is all about. But then everybody collectively remembers, oh wait, yep, nobody bought this. So there's a shitload of demand, but the supply is subterranean, which is how you end up with Double Dash at $80, Thousand Year Door at $100, Path of Radiance at over $200, and Gacha Force at throw yourself into traffic. Yes, there are games on other platforms that can hit these insane prices, like Xenosaga 3 and Futurama, but those are much more the exception than the rule. Even on the lower end with the GameCube, you're going to be paying a lot more than you will pay for the lower end of other platforms. And that's only a more well-known example. You try collecting for stuff like the Sega Saturn or Dreamcast? Hope you're willing to skip this month's rent! The best advice I can give on this front is be mindful of when it's the right time to collect for specific platforms. Generally, the sweet spot for collecting for a console is the point when it stops being immediately relevant while also not being old enough to be deeply nostalgic for people. A good example of this right now would be the PS4, a system that's out of the spotlight, but folks aren't looking back on it with fond memories yet. It's also important to be mindful of this time for the less popular consoles, as they can be even more expensive before the nostalgia truly hits. However, these prices can still range wildly due to what companies choose to do with those older games in the current day, because the availability of the games on modern platforms. This one is pretty self-explanatory. If a game is much more commonly available on relevant hardware, you're more than likely not going to be fighting a war to get your hands on an old copy, though there are exceptions. To stick with the GameCube for a second, this is a big underlying reason as to why many of the system's games are so expensive, because Nintendo almost never re-releases any of them. Hell, there was a time during the Wii U and 3DS era where every major Nintendo system had some type of virtual console service, except for the GameCube. What do you have against this grape lunchbox, Nintendo? In fact, the Wii U itself is a perfect example of this phenomenon. As is well known by now, Nintendo spent a good chunk of the Switch's first few years porting over the wide majority of the Wii U's best titles and giving them some enhancements. This was something Nintendo was heavily criticized for at the time, as some claimed they were just recycling old games and not making anything new. And yeah, charging full price for these enhanced ports was definitely worth critiquing. In some cases, even increasing the prices from the original release. I mean, we all love Funky Kong Nintendo, but him and his board ain't worth 10 extra bones. However, the general practice of these re-releases not only made complete business sense, as now way more people could experience these games on a much bigger platform, but it also means these games will have far more copies out in the wild in the future, and thus, you won't have to sell your plasma in order to afford one of them. Seriously, if you guys think that GameCube's prices are bad now, with how pitiful the Wii U sales were, if that system ever hit a huge nostalgia boom in a world without these Switch ports, you would have needed to prepare to take out a mortgage just to play Pokken Tournament. There's even current day evidence of this happening, as looking at the going rate of games such as Xenoblade X, Wind Waker HD, Twilight Princess HD, Game & Wario, and even stuff like Wii Party U and Paper Mario Color Splash, all have far higher average market prices than the vast majority of games that either got ports or outright successors on the Switch, with the only big outliers being indescribable dung heaps like Sonic Boom, Star Fox Zero, and
Amiibo Festival.
You can even see it with specific beloved games that barely get re-released like Chrono Trigger, which even the DS version can go for $100 in box now because for some reason Square refuses to port this masterpiece to modern consoles. HD 2D Square, just Do it! But no doubt the prime culprit of this struggle is fucking Pokemon. Try getting any of Platinum through Black and White 2 at a recent price. I dare you. This series is a searing pain in the ass to buy for, because literally every person with a pulse wants to try the older Pokemon games, but for some reason, even just thinking about porting them causes Pokemon Company to break out in a rash. God, I hope the 3DS and Switch games don't hit this problem later. Now, when it comes to combating this, well, there ain't much a customer can do here, unless you can hack into a company's servers and put the games up on their storefront, in which case thank you for your service. This is more just a call to game companies of, please port your games more. You love making easy money, and slapping an old game on a current platform people want to play is one of the easiest ways to do that. Although one thing a collector could do is, if you love a specific generation a lot, try to collect when it's relevant or a couple years past relevancy. That way, there's far more copies in circulation, so you don't have to attempt to hunt down a copy 15 years later when it's never been ported and everyone else is looking for that same copy. Which particularly becomes a problem when niche games rising in interest. This one is almost completely up to the winds of fate on what people care about, and that's when a previously niche game, for one reason or another, becomes far more popular long past its relevant time period. Thus, way more people are interested in it than there are actual copies on the market. If any genre is overly familiar with this situation, it's RPGs. Many great RPGs from the likes of the Super Nintendo, PlayStation 1, and even as far up as the 3DS were skipped over in their time, only for the genre to grow a far greater appreciation compared to the 90s and 2000s. So when these overlooked titles are given far larger exposure for one reason or another, there's now 10 people fighting for every copy. Xenogears is a perfect example of this. This was a pretty niche title for a long period of time, with only certain hardcore crowds understanding its connection to the likes of Xenosaga and Blade. But then the Xeno series had a massive renaissance over the course of the Switch era via the likes of Xenoblade 2 and 3, and then more people found out about the series' prior roots, and yep, there it is. And it doesn't even need to be for a big relevant reason like that. It can just happen via word of mouth. Breath of Fire 3 and 4, Vagrant Story, Ogre Battle, Lufia 2, Evo, not that one, Soul Blazer, Suikoden 2, Yokai Watch 3, all of these games either flew under the radar or didn't sell well, and now it's damn near impossible to get them in the current day. And it isn't even just limited to individual games. Some entire companies are notorious for putting out niche titles that people find out about long after it's too late, with the undisputed king of this being you. Atlus has had this happen since the 90s, and quite frankly, it still hasn't stopped. Anything from their more famous series like Persona growing in prominence, causing the less popular older titles to spike up, or far more underground releases like Steambot Chronicles, Cartia the Word of Fate, Thousand Arms, and Samurai Western, all having their obscure status contribute to their price. And of course, if talking Atlus, you can't go without mentioning by far their most expensive underground title, the most famous, or more likely infamous, Rule of Rose. Notoriously the rarest and most expensive game out of the entire PlayStation 2 library, which, with how generally inexpensive the rest of that collection is, makes it stand out all the more when a game goes for the low asking price of... And oh god, on the topic of Rule of Rose, while RPGs and anime games are the cream of the crop when it comes to nicheness, horror games are right on their heels. Unless it was a still relevant modern mega hit like Resident Evil, many older horror games go for ludicrous rates nowadays. Eternal Darkness, Fatal Frame, Clock Tower, Dino Crisis, and oh god, Silent Hill. I just want to play these games. God, why are they so expensive? Which, for a lot of these games, is the result of many of them never getting re-releases. Yeah, if you couldn't tell, a lot of these issues overlap. If there's any recommendation I could give for this conundrum, it's to keep an eye out for less popular games when they're relevant. And if you're looking for already old niche games, look out for sellers who may or may not know what they have. There are some less savvy game vendors who won't know the true value of rarer games that they have in their possession. That's how I got my copy of Suikoden 5 for only $40. And while it may feel a little scummy to effectively shortchange a seller, honestly in this market, do what you gotta do. And for what appears on the current market, try and follow games that aren't just mainstream. It's becoming far easier to know of underground games thanks to the internet and social media. So try and take into account when those games come out, their general stock expectations, and or when they drop in price. If collecting is big enough for you, this can save you a massive headache years down the line. I've actually done this a lot for the Switch, buying up a ton of smaller games that not only I think I will enjoy, but also may raise in value in future years, so I can get them now at or under standard MSRP, instead of being concerned about spending triple for them 5 years from now. And in some cases, it already seems to be paying off. Falcom, what are you doing? So that covers the 3 major problems that had been kind of creeping up on retro games collecting for many years, most of the 2010s I would argue. However, it was a little something that happened shortly after the 2010s that made all this shit get 100 times worse. The pandemic. Just fucking COVID. Everything I've said up till now wounded the secondhand gaming market, but the pandemic damn near crippled it. It was by far the single most damaging factor to the prices of games on the North American retro market. And honestly, that isn't hyperbole. Go on to price charting and look up nearly any slightly above average expensive game, and you will see a noticeable spike of varying degrees around the halfway point to the later end of 2020. As a result of people being stuck inside and getting more into video games, and game sellers pushing out a lot of their stock so they could have more income during this shit show. So it made the supply and demand problem even fucking worse, and we're still feeling the effects of it. Truth be told, there ain't much more to it than that. The Sicky Wiki fucked everything up and we gotta wait for it to get better. And there's really no advice I can give in this section other than build a time machine and go back and stop the Rona. This is unfortunately one we're just gonna have to suck it up and deal with until, hopefully, the market can return to a sense of prior normality. Whenever that may be. So those are what I would see as the 4 biggest issues making retro game collecting a total ass sore. There's definitely a few other small factors that can affect prices as well, but like I said, I really just wanted an excuse to bitch. If you got any tips or tricks you personally do for collecting or have any funny collection stories, drop them in the comments. I genuinely love to hear them. Ultimately, if you're into collecting or want to get into it, just do your best on following prices, be smart on when you spend your money and what systems you're buying for. Don't neglect relevant options that could save you later. And for the love of God, game companies, port your shit more often. Yes, I am looking at you.
For fuck's sake!